You have no idea who you just pulled over. The words hung in the cold November air, visible in small puffs of vapor, as Special Agent Marcus Webb spoke them through gritted teeth. Officer Derek Morrison's hand hovered near his service weapon, his body rigid with the kind of tension that comes from sensing a situation spiraling beyond control. But that moment, that precipice between order and chaos, wouldn't arrive for another 15 minutes. First, there was the stop itself. The dashboard clock in Morrison's patrol car showed 11:42 p.m. when he first spotted the black Tahoe. 3 years out of the academy, working the night shift in Precinct 47, Morrison had developed a rhythm to his patrols. Quiet residential streets, the occasional drunk driver, sometimes a domestic call. Tonight had been particularly slow until his radio crackled to life. Unit 23, this is Captain Hutchins. Need you to bolo for a black Tahoe. Partial plate starts with J4. Possible DUI, erratic driving reported near Route 22. Morrison perked up. Captain Raymond Hutchins rarely worked nights, and when he did, he usually stayed at the station. Copy that, Captain. Any description of the driver? Negative. Just find that vehicle. The order struck Morrison as odd, but Hutchins had been on the force for 28 years. If he said to look for something, you looked 0.5 minutes later. Morrison's headlights caught the gleam of a black Tahoe merging onto Route 22 from the I-495 interchange. The plate, J4M 8827. His pulse quickened as he fell in behind the vehicle, maintaining a two-car distance while observing its movement. The Tahoe held steady at exactly 35 miles per hour. Turn signals activated well before lane changes. Full stops at every sign. If this was a drunk driver, they were the most careful drunk driver Morrison had ever encountered. But orders were orders. Inside the Tahoe, Marcus Webb was thinking about his daughter's college acceptance letter. Yale Law School, the same program he dreamed of before the FBI recruited him straight out of Howard University. 23 years later, Jasmine was following a path he'd once imagined for himself. The surveillance operation had run long, but it had been worth it. They'd documented 14 separate vehicles entering Chen's warehouse, photographed 6 known associates, and recorded what appeared to be a major shipment preparation. 8 months of careful investigation was finally yielding results. His phone, mounted on the dashboard, showed 3 missed calls from his wife, Patricia. He'd text her from the driveway. Sorry, baby. Caught up at work again. The same message he'd sent 100 times before. She understood. After 2 decades of marriage to a federal agent, she'd learned that home by dinner was more aspiration than promise. The rearview mirror erupted in red and blue. Webb's training kicked in immediately. He checked his speed. Cruise control locked at 35, exactly the posted limit. Ran through his recent movements. No traffic violations. All lane changes signaled. His hand instinctively moved to his jacket pocket, feeling the weight of his badge and credentials. He eased onto the shoulder. Muscle memory from 1,000 traffic stops guided his movements. Interior light on. Engine off. Hands visible on the steering wheel. Window down halfway. He'd taught this same protocol to young agents, to his teenage son, to anyone who would listen. The goal, he always said, is to make everyone feel safe. But Officer Morrison, approaching the vehicle with one hand on his weapon, didn't look like he felt safe at all. Keep your hands where I can see them. Morrison's voice carried the sharp edge of adrenaline. Through his body camera, which would later become evidence in 3 separate investigations, his approach appeared textbook. Steady pace, offset angle, flashlight held high and away from his body. What the camera couldn't capture was Morrison's growing confusion. The driver's hands were already visible, placed at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. The interior light illuminated a well-dressed black man in his late 40s, wearing what looked like an expensive suit. The vehicle's interior was immaculate. No beer cans, no drug paraphernalia, nothing to suggest the erratic driving Hutchins had reported. Good evening, officer. Webb's voice was calm, professional. Is there a problem? License and registration. Now. Morrison watched as the driver moved with deliberate slowness, narrating each action. I'm reaching for my wallet in my back pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. This wasn't the behavior of a drunk driver. This was someone who'd been through this before, someone who understood the dance of a traffic stop. Morrison's instincts, still developing but not yet corrupted by cynicism, began sending up warning signals. When Webb handed over his identification, Morrison's flashlight caught the gold shield first. FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The credentials looked authentic. Holographic seals, photo matching the driver, badge number clearly visible. Your FBI? Morrison couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. Special Agent Marcus Webb, Organized Crime Division. I'm heading home from a surveillance operation. Is there a reason you pulled me over, Officer Morrison? Webb had noted the nameplate, filing it away with the kind of automatic attention to detail that comes from decades in law enforcement. Morrison felt the ground shifting beneath him. He'd pulled over a federal agent for no legitimate reason, based on a vague bolo from his captain. His career, barely started, flashed before his eyes. Sir, there was a report of erratic driving. Was there? Webb's tone remained conversational, but Morrison caught the steel underneath. Did you observe any erratic driving, Officer Morrison? The question hung between them like a test. Morrison could lie, could fabricate probable cause after the fact. Many officers did. It would be easy to claim he'd seen the Tahoe swerving, speeding, failing to signal. Hutchins would back him up, he was sure of that. But his father's voice echoed in his head. A man's word is all he really owns in this life. No, sir, Morrison admitted. I didn't observe any violations. Webb nodded slowly, processing this admission. Then why did you pull me over? I received a bolo from Captain Hutchins. Black Tahoe, partial plate J4. Possible DUI. Something flickered across Webb's face. Not surprise, exactly, but recognition. Like puzzle pieces clicking into place. Captain Raymond Hutchins specifically. Yes, sir. Webb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 8 months of investigation, and Hutchins's name had surfaced 3 weeks ago in intercepted communications. A cop on Chen's payroll, providing protection and intelligence. They hadn't had enough evidence to move on him yet, but now. Officer Morrison, Webb said carefully. I'm going to ask you to call for your supervisor. Captain Hutchins is my supervisor, sir. He's actually on duty tonight. Of course he was. Webb felt the trap closing around him, understanding now that this was no random stop. Someone had leaked his identity, his vehicle, his routine, and Hutchins had sent an honest cop to do his dirty work, probably counting on Morrison's inexperience and adherence to authority. Then we have a problem, Webb said quietly. Before Morrison could respond, another set of headlights washed over them. A unmarked Crown Victoria pulled up behind Morrison's patrol car, and Captain Raymond Hutchins stepped out into the night. Morrison straightened unconsciously, the ingrained response to a superior officer. But Webb remained perfectly still, watching Hutchins approach in his side mirror. The captain moved with the confidence of a man who'd gotten away with corruption for so long he'd forgotten to be careful. Morrison, Hutchins called out, his voice carrying false joviality. What do we have here? Sir, I've stopped the vehicle you called in. The driver is. He says he's FBI. Hutchins reached the driver's side window, and Webb got his first good look at the man he'd been investigating. Late 50s, thick through the middle, with the ruddy complexion of someone who drank too much and exercised too little. His eyes were sharp and calculating. Well, Hutchins said, leaning down to peer into the vehicle. Special Agent Webb. Funny meeting you here. The use of his name sent ice through Webb's veins. There was no way Hutchins should know who he was unless. Captain, Webb kept his voice level. I don't believe we've met. Oh, we haven't. But I know all about you. You've been very busy lately, poking around where you shouldn't be, making certain people nervous. Morrison looked between the two men, confusion evident on his face. Captain, do you two know each other? In a manner of speaking, Hutchins replied, his hand moving to rest on his service weapon. Agent Webb here has been conducting some very interesting surveillance. Haven't you, Marcus? The casual use of his first name was meant to unsettle, to demonstrate how much Hutchins knew. It worked. Webb's mind raced through contingencies, escape routes, alternatives. His service weapon sat heavy in his shoulder holster, but drawing on 2 cops would only end one way. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Webb said carefully. Oh, I don't think so. Hutchins smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Morrison, this man is armed. I'm going to need you to get him out of the vehicle. Morrison hesitated. Sir, he's shown me federal credentials. Shouldn't we verify? Are you questioning my judgment, officer? Hutchins's voice dropped to a dangerous register. Webb watched Morrison's internal struggle play out on his face. A young cop caught between his training and his instincts, between authority and something that felt increasingly wrong. No, sir, Morrison said finally. But I think we should, what you should do, Hutchins interrupted, is follow orders. Now get him out of the car. The moment stretched taut. Three men at a crossroads on a dark stretch of highway. Morrison's hand moved uncertainly toward his weapon. Hutchins's fingers drummed against his holster. And Webb sat perfectly still, knowing that the next 60 seconds would determine whether he made it home to his family. Officer Morrison, Webb said quietly, before you do anything, there's something you should know. Shut your mouth, Hutchins snapped. But Webb continued, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd testified in hundreds of cases, who'd faced down career criminals. And one, your captain is under federal investigation. He's been taking money from the Chun trafficking organization. And right now, he's trying to use you too. Hutchins's hand went to his weapon. That's enough. Morrison, arrest this man now. The young officer stood frozen, his world tilting on its axis. Everything he'd been taught, everything he believed about the blue line and standing by your fellow officers, crashed against the growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. In that moment of hesitation, the radio in Morrison's patrol car crackled to life. All units, be advised. We have a 10 to 54 reported on Route 22. Black Tahoe, license plate J4M 8827. Federal agent in distress. Repeat, federal agent in distress. Hutchins's face went pale. Webb allowed himself a small smile. My partner, Webb explained calmly. When I didn't check in on schedule, he started making calls. In about 3 minutes, this stretch of highway is going to be crawling with FBI agents. So Captain Hutchins, you need to decide right now how this ends. The transformation in Captain Raymond Hutchins was instant and visceral. 28 years of careful corruption, of envelopes passed in parking garages and blind eyes turned to truckloads of contraband, all of it crumbling in the span of a radio transmission. His hand trembled slightly as it hovered over his weapon, calculating odds that grew worse by the second. You're lying, Hutchins said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. Webb remained perfectly still, his years of negotiation training taking over. Officer Morrison, in about 2 minutes, FBI Special Agent Rodriguez and a full tactical team are going to arrive. When they do, you're going to have to explain why you're holding a federal agent at gunpoint during an active investigation. How do you think that's going to go? Morrison's body camera captured everything. The sweat beading on Hutchins's forehead despite the cold night air, the slight tremor in his gun hand, the way his eyes darted between Webb and the empty highway. Behind them, what it couldn't capture was the captain's desperate mental arithmetic. How many years for assaulting a federal agent, for obstruction of justice, for conspiracy? Whether Chin would protect him or cut him loose. Whether his pension would survive. If he walked away now. Morrison, Hutchins's voice cracked slightly. Arrest him. That's a direct order. The young officer stood at the fulcrum of his life, though he wouldn't fully understand that until much later. In the academy, they'd taught him about chain of command, about following orders, about the thin blue line. They hadn't taught him what to do when your captain was dirty, when following orders meant becoming complicit in something that would haunt you forever. Sir, Morrison said slowly, I think we should wait for the backup units. There are no backup units. Hutchins exploded. He's bluffing. Can't you see that? But even as he spoke, the distant wail of sirens began to pierce the night. Not the measured approach of routine backup, but the urgent scream of multiple units. Converging fast, Webb watched Hutchins's face cycle through emotions. Rage, fear, calculation, and finally, desperation. It was the look of a cornered animal, and Webb knew from experience that cornered animals were when they were most dangerous. Captain Hutchins, Webb said evenly, you can still walk away from this. Get in your car and leave. My issue isn't with you, it's with Chun. But if you draw that weapon, if you escalate this, there's no coming back. It was a lie, of course. The FBI had been building a case against Hutchins for weeks. But Webb needed to defuse the immediate situation, to give the corrupt captain an out that didn't involve gunfire on a dark highway, Hutchins's laugh was bitter. Walk away? You think I'm stupid? You've been watching the warehouse. You know about the shipments. Hell, you probably know about the account in the Caymans. Morrison's sharp intake of breath was audible. The final piece of his innocence, his belief in the inherent honor of the badge, shattered like glass. Captain, Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper. What are you talking about? Shut up, rookie. Hutchins's mask had slipped completely now, revealing the ugly truth beneath. You have no idea how this world really works. How much money flows through this city? How many people are on the take? You think your measly salary is worth dying for? Worth watching your kids grow up in a two-bedroom apartment? The sirens were closer now, maybe 30 seconds out. Through his rearview mirror, Webb could see the glow of approaching lights painting the horizon. It's over, Hutchins, Webb said. Put the weapon down. Time seemed to crystallize in that moment. Hutchins's hand tightened on his pistol grip. Morrison took an instinctive step back, his own hand moving to his weapon. And Webb, trapped in the driver's seat, calculated angles and distances with the clinical detachment of someone who'd survived too many close calls to panic now. Then Officer Derek Morrison did something that would define the rest of his career, something that would be studied in ethics classes and praised in departmental commendations. He stepped between Hutchins and the Tahoe. No, Captain, Morrison said, his voice steady now. I can't let you do this. Get out of my way, Morrison. No, sir. The standoff might have stretched forever, three men frozen in a tableau of conflicting loyalties and moral choices. But the arrival of the FBI broke the spell like thunder. Three black Suburbans roared onto the scene, tires screaming as they formed a tactical semicircle. Agents poured out, weapons drawn, shouting commands that overlapped into chaos. Rodriguez was first out, his voice cutting through the noise. FBI, everyone freeze. Hands where we can see them. Hutchins spun toward the new arrivals, his weapon half drawn, and for a terrifying moment Webb thought the captain might actually be stupid enough to draw on federal agents. But self-preservation finally overrode desperation. Hutchins's hands rose slowly, his pistol clattering to the asphalt. Down on the ground. Now, the takedown was swift and professional. Within seconds, Hutchins was face down on the cold pavement, hands cuffed behind his back. Morrison stood apart, looking lost and overwhelmed as federal agents swarmed the scene. Rodriguez approached Webb's vehicle, concern evident on his face. Marcus, you good? Yeah. Webb exhaled slowly, feeling the adrenaline drain from his system. Thanks to Officer Morrison here. Morrison looked up, surprised. In the swirling lights and chaos, he'd expected to be arrested too, to be painted with the same brush as his corrupt captain. This is the officer who stood between Hutchins and me, Webb explained to Rodriguez. He made the right call when it mattered. Rodriguez studied Morrison with the calculating gaze of a career investigator. That true, officer? You willing to testify to what happened here? Morrison straightened, finding his voice. Yes, sir. Captain Hutchins ordered me to make a pretextual stop. When he arrived, he seemed to know Agent Webb, mentioned surveillance and money. He paused, then added, I'll tell you everything I know. As crime scene technicians photographed the scene and evidence response teams cataloged every detail, Webb finally stepped out of his vehicle. His legs were steadier than he'd expected, muscle memory carrying him through the familiar rhythm of post-incident protocols. Hutchins was being loaded into an FBI vehicle, his career and freedom measured now in decades rather than years. As he passed Webb, their eyes met briefly. This isn't over, Hutchins snarled. You have no idea how deep this goes. How many people you're messing with. Webb regarded him with something almost like pity. Actually, Captain, I know exactly how deep it goes. Chin rolled on you 3 hours ago. We have recordings, financial records, everything. You were just the last loose end. The color drained from Hutchins's face as the full scope of his situation crystallized. The federal vehicle door slammed shut, carrying away a man who'd traded his integrity for money and learned too late that some prices were too high to pay. The aftermath unfolded with the methodical precision of justice grinding forward. By dawn, 14 arrests had been made across 3 states. The Chun trafficking organization, which had moved everything from fentanyl to weapons through the port city, collapsed like a house of cards. Officer Derek Morrison found himself in a conference room at FBI headquarters. sharing everything he knew about corruption in Precinct 47. His testimony would eventually lead to the conviction of 3 more officers and a fundamental restructuring of the department. "I keep thinking," Morrison told Webb during a break in his deposition, "what if I'd just followed orders? What if I'd arrested you without questioning it?" Webb poured them both coffee, the universal peace offering of law enforcement. "But you didn't. When the moment came, you chose your integrity over your career. That's not something they can teach. At the academy, think I'll still have a career after this, after exposing corruption and protecting a federal agent." Webb smiled. "Son, departments across the country are going to be fighting over you. But if you want my advice, come work for us. The FBI could use more agents who know the difference between orders and what's right." 3 months later, when Derek Morrison submitted his application to the FBI Academy at Quantico, his recommendation letter bore the signature of Special Agent Marcus Webb. The letter detailed the night a young patrol officer had stood at a crossroads and chosen justice over comfort, integrity over ease. Captain Raymond Hutchins received 25 years in federal prison, his testimony helping to dismantle a network that had corrupted law enforcement across the eastern seaboard. In his cell at night, he had plenty of time to replay that traffic stop, to wonder how different things might have been if he'd simply driven past that black Tahoe on Route 22. The dashboard camera footage from Morrison's patrol car became a training tool, studied by cadets and veteran officers alike. It showed, in stark detail, the moment when a routine traffic stop became a test of character, when a young officer's moral courage prevented a tragedy and exposed a conspiracy. But perhaps the most lasting impact came from the quiet conversations in precinct break rooms, where officers discussed what they would have done in Morrison's place. The easy answer was that they'd all have made the right choice. The honest answer was more complicated, wrapped up in questions of loyalty and survival, of mortgages and peer pressure, of the thousand small compromises that could lead to that moment on a dark highway. Special Agent Marcus Webb returned to his work, leading the task force that continued to root out corruption in law enforcement. But he never forgot that night on Route 22, when a young officer's conscience had been the thin blue line between justice and injustice. And sometimes, late at night in his home office, Webb would pull up the email Morrison had sent him after graduating from Quantico. "Agent Webb, thank you for showing me that the badge isn't about power or authority. It's about standing between the darkness and the people we've sworn to protect, even when the darkness wears a badge too. Especially then. In the end, that was the real victory, not the arrests or convictions, but the proof that integrity could still triumph over corruption, that one person standing up for what was right could make all the difference." The traffic stop that began with arrogance and assumption had ended with justice and revelation. A corrupt captain had pulled the trigger on his own downfall, and a young officer had discovered that the true meaning of the thin blue line wasn't about protecting bad cops. It was about protecting the innocent from anyone who would abuse their power, badge or no badge.